Welcome to the Emily the Mystic Show. You're about to walk through a portal that leads to all things mystical, magical, spiritual, and supernatural. I'm your host, Emily. I'm a spiritual mentor, an Akashic Records practitioner and teacher, an intuition development coach, and a galactic channeler. If you're an old soul on a self-discovery and healing journey, you are in the right place. We'll be diving in deep to some of my favorite mystical topics, including manifestation, past lives, the spirit world, energy, and so much more. Get ready to embrace your inner mystic and live your most authentic life possible. The portal is now open. Hello, my dear listener, and welcome to a very intriguing episode of the Emily the Mystic Show, if I do say so myself. I had the pleasure of receiving a session from this incredibly talented healer just a few months ago that was so enlightening and really provided so much clarity on things in my own life. And you're just going to love this conversation today because I know you and I know you love learning as much as you can about different aspects of the spiritual space. So I cannot wait to introduce you today to Gayle. Gayle is a psychopomp and energy healer that specializes in helping people remove energies that are attached to them so that they can regain their sovereignty. She loves helping spirits move from being stuck or causing problems for us back to where they truly belong. Spirits are often bound by curses or vows or contracts, and undoing them is an important part of her work. These bindings can be on purpose and meant to cause harm, but they can also have been intended to be helpful or guiding and set up by our ancestors. Meeting the spirits involved and figuring out where they came from and why they're here is important to give everyone their sovereignty back and what makes the work unique and fun. Welcome, Gayle Revels, to the show.
Oh, thank you. So nice to be here. I'm really happy that you invited me.
Yay. And so we can get to know you a little bit better. Can you share with us your astrology, sun, moon, and rising, and your human design type?
Sure. I am very Scorpio. I am Scorpio sun and rising with a Gemini moon, and I'm a manifesting generator.
None of that surprises me.
My profession doesn't shock you?
No. Knowing what you specialize in and how that relates to Scorpio makes so much sense. And I am also a Gemini moon. I'm super curious. So I'm going to be asking you a lot of curious questions today.
Awesome.
Yay. So let's dive in. I know you call yourself a psychopomp. So I would love to know what that word means to you and how you would describe the field of work that you do.
Sure. So a psychopomp is actually a French word, and it means conductor of souls. And for me, that's someone who helps a spirit move from one place to another. And I started off calling myself an energy healer because honestly, that's the field of work that I really play in or work in. But the guides are really insistent about being called a psychopomp because the type of healing that I like to do with people is removing the layers that sit on top of us that prevent us from living a true, authentic, sovereign life of our own. And that often includes helping spirits move back to where they are better suited and away from us.
And how did you come into this field of work? Are there any major moments in your story or times in your life that have led you here? We would love to know.
Sure, there's a couple. I really came into this type of work because I'm clairaudient, which just means everything talks to me. And that was really difficult for me as a child because my family of origin did not understand or approve of that. And, it started off with you have a great imagination, which is great to tell a child, but then moved into you should be quiet about that or you're going to get institutionalized, which was not as much fun. But so I spent a lot of my life trying to make the voices stop. And I just wanted them to shut up and go away. And I spent a lot of time and effort trying to make that happen. And I don't know, I was in my 30s when someone finally said, that's a gift that you can't turn off that way. And you need to learn how to work with it. And I was still very much not into that. And I took a Reiki class, and the Reiki attunement, anyone who's really played with Reiki is probably already aware of this, but it took down all of the the unsupported walls I had set up between me and spirit, which on one hand, great, they needed to come down. On the other hand, oh no, I didn't know what to do with that. So really started me down this path of really figuring out how to make the voices stop. And for me, it turned out that I was hearing a lot of ancestral energy that wasn't healthy or wasn't crossed over. I could hear everything else too, but the ancestral energy was why I was so unhappy with it. And I met a really good medium psychopomp teacher who I adore. Her name's Betsy Bergstrom. But I was sitting in my first shamanic class with a teacher who said, we were talking about extraction. How do you remove energy that isn't yours? And she said, well, really, there's two types of extraction, and we only do one in my class. The other one I don't like to do. And of course, that makes the entire class want to know about the one she doesn't want to do. I felt kind of bad for her because we would not let it go. Everybody was asking questions. But the two types that she was wanting to talk about was solid and fluid. And she says, solid extraction is where a thought or an energy gets stuck in the body, kind of like a splinter. And it just needs to be removed and filled in with something else, and which feels wonderful. By the way, if you haven't done it, highly recommend it. But the other is fluid. And a fluid energy is something that can move around the body. And when it can move around the body, it's alive. And if it's alive, now you're talking about my type of work now. But at the time, I was like, what do you mean it's alive? And that was really my first true introduction to spirit attachments. And finally, in absolute frustration, my teacher said, if you want to know more about this, talk to Betsy Bergstrom. And that's how I met her. So that was kind of my thing. But when she started talking about fluid attachments, it was like somebody stuck a bowl over my head and wrung it. I was like, I have no idea what this is, but I'm supposed to do this.
And did that start unfolding in your own life with doing your own work, or did that lead you to helping others with that sort of spirit release first?
Yeah. So my guides were really loud that this work is broken up into several classes, that I needed to do all of them and I needed to do them all at once. And I was like, I can't afford that. And this person's in Seattle and I'm in San Francisco, and it's in person at the time before the pandemic. And they just kept saying I had to do it. So finally I threw my hands up in absolute frustration. I was like, if I'm supposed to do this, you have to bring me the money to do this outside of my regular paycheck. And literally like 5 days later, my dad just impromptu sent me money, which he'd never done in my entire life. And I was like, okay, I guess this is happening. I did the first class and we had 5 days in between. And then I did the second class and I just stayed in Seattle. And the guides were like, you're going to be teaching this. And I was like, I haven't even done it on a person outside of class. And they're like, yep, you're going to be teaching this. And I was like, okay. And still in that in-between state, someone I had taken the first class with that I really liked. We traded phone numbers. She lives in 3 or 4 hours north of here. She called me and she said, Gayle, I have a really active attachment from class. And I called Betsy, and Betsy said that she couldn't do it in between classes and I would have to wait. So I asked my guides, and my guides told me to call you. So that was my first client. It was over the phone with another beginner, and she had literally had a demon. Like I tell clients all the time, demons are really rare. You probably don't have one. It's probably something else. But that was my first client.
Wow. Amazing.
And the guides are like, of course it was. You've been doing this for many lifetimes and you know what to do. And yes, you just learned it in this lifetime, but this is, for me, I would say it's a soul contract. It's something I'm supposed to do.
I can totally relate with some of those initial clients being some of the more challenging ones. And you're like, what am I getting myself into?
Why are we starting here? Can we go back to starting with the land spirit? That one was easy. Yeah. That's the one we did in class.
So what did that class cover? What did you learn? And what are the different elements of spirit release that you know how to clear?
Oh, that class covers kind of the cosmology or the landscape of spirits, what kinds of things can be attached, where they might go, what type of beings might help you, forming relationships with helping spirits that specialize in this type of work, building your own team of guides to do this work, There's a lot of practice in a class like that where you take turns being the client and the practitioner, but usually you work in groups of 4 where 2 other people are kind of the anchor. So they're anchoring the energy or boosting the practitioner. They can help when the practitioner student gets stuck. That kind of work. So it's a lot of practice and a lot of building your own team and learning about the cosmology.
Fascinating. Wow. So when it comes to spirit attachment, what are some of the signs to look out for that could indicate there's something off, there's something going on, and it's likely that?
Yeah. Some of them are pretty generic, like I'm tired for no reason is probably the number one sign, but we can be tired for so many reasons that this is not usually the first thing people think about. But if a client shows up to me and they're like, I'm so tired, there's no reason, all of my bells are going off. It's probably an attachment. A sign that you might think of for yourself that maybe is a little better is when something that you're working on is totally blocked. You're like, I can study it 10 different ways, but then I go to do it and I just can't. Or I can do it in class, but I can't do it outside of class. I can't advertise or be visible with the thing I want to do. Those are really common blocks. So feeling blocked in something you've worked on, or that you can do it some, but not the way you really think you should be able to, is another really good sign. I tell clients who've worked with me before, when they ask, how do I know if I need to come back? It's when life is out of flow for no logical reason. So you're like, I don't know why nothing seems to work, or I'm tired, or I'm constantly distracted, which is another sign. I find people with curses that are blocking them from doing something they want to do often has a spirit attached to it. There's the one that's causing distraction, chaos, brain fog. Those are all signs and symptoms of interference. And that interference, often the being might not be the primary cause of the interference, but they're the one enforcing the intention of the curse or the binding.
So let's talk about that. I feel like there are a lot of misconceptions out there in the spiritual space about what curses are. So what is a curse to you? And can you kind of break that down to us?
Yeah. So for me, I use curse as a generic word, and a curse, the structure of a curse always has an intention. It's meant to do something. A target, it's meant to do it to somebody or something or some group. Curses, for one thing, they usually feel personal. You're blocking me. So it feels like it's like an attack on me. And it might be, I might be the target, but it might have also been my family 400 years ago, and I'm just kind of living with it. Or it could have been a group I was in a past life that has the curse. So it's important to know who the target is when you go to undo them. But a curse structure always has an intention, a target, and some type of power. The power is what keeps it going and keeps it moving. And if you think about that structure is neutral. Intention, target, power. So, and I think curses in general are neutral. It's just we only hear about the ones that are horrible. So if you think about that structure, it could be maybe a guiding principle. I think that, not me personally, we'll say some of the cursor things, people in my family should marry people who have good jobs or own land or are affluent. In the modern day, some people I'm sure still think that way, but it's not as common. But if you go back 200 or 300 years ago, where it was arranged marriage and more about property, then you could see how they could have some really strict rules about finances or job type. And so if you just think, hey, I really want my kids to marry well, you've just got the 2 parts of a curse right there. I want my kids to marry well, intention and target. As long as you don't put any power behind it, it's just a wish for your kids. I want them to do well in school. I want them to be successful. That's not cursing. But when you put power behind it, suddenly it's binding. And the moment you make it binding, then it has that curse structure. And it could be protective. Like think of, say, the witch trial era. If having gifts in public was dangerous for not just you, but your family, a parent might wish their kids never show any gifts in public, which is logical, makes sense, right? So, but there's a lot of fear, and maybe their ancestors are agreeing, or their guides are wanting to help, or they do an actual spell to bind their kids from speaking about gifts in public. Well, at that moment in time, that made a lot of sense. If they had put a timeline on it, while they're kids, when they're old enough, they can, or only during this period where being witches is dangerous, then it would have gone away. But if they don't put a timeline on it, if you don't want your kids to show gifts in public and you put power behind it, each generation then who has kids, it just moves down the line. So now we're, 400 or 500 years later, and you're like, I can study it, I can do it, but I can't do it publicly. I can't talk about it. That's it's still a curse, but it was protective. So like I like to joke, it doesn't age well. It might have been fine at the time, but it's not working anymore. So it could be guiding, it could be protective, and they definitely can be on purpose to cause harm.
And when you say putting power behind the curse, does that mean holding a really strong intention? The reason why I'm asking the question is I'm thinking to myself, well, if I just, in a moment of frustration or emotion or anger, just say, I wish that, I wish this on this person, or we're just sort of saying something that we think is offhand. So do our words in that way really matter when it comes to a curse? Or is this something where someone is really intentionally creating a spell? Or do you see what I'm trying to ask here?
I do. We can definitely curse on accident. And that example of being really angry and saying something in the heat of the moment, not everybody's going to set a curse when we do that. And we're not going to do it every time we get angry, thank goodness. But our words really, really matter. If you're someone who manifests really well, the flip side of that is you curse really well too, because you're putting your life force power behind that. And we have varying levels of that. I also find that if we say it out loud, not just in our head, you're more likely to actually be cursing, because anything around you that can't hear you might decide to help with that intention. And now that intention has a lot more power. So yeah, words matter a lot.
That's so fascinating. And it sounds like from what you shared that we can still be affected by a curse from past lifetimes, as well as our ancestral line, and also things from this lifetime.
That's true. Because curses usually don't have timelines in them. So when they do, then they could end. But we often don't think to do that. I think humans are famous for forgetting we reincarnate, or that we're making bargains with beings that live a lot longer than we do. Both those things really have impact. And I want to say one more thing about accidental cursing. When we calm down, most of us are like, I'm glad I didn't actually do anything. I didn't really mean it, right? But if you are one of those people that manifest really strongly and you're like, oh no, did I actually do something? All you have to do is intend to call back any energy that you sent. So you're like, please cancel that. I didn't mean that. I'm not sending any energy. Please, return any energy I might have sent or put behind that. And it can, because it's not on purpose. You didn't do something really deliberate behind it to give it power. So when you find yourself doing things by accident, you can recall it.
And on that note, that brings up an interesting question, which is it possible to be affected by other people around you in this lifetime who are wishing you ill will or negative energy now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So while most of the world doesn't have a really active cursing culture anymore, there are definitely pockets of it that are actively cursing, but most of us aren't in the world. But that negativity or those things that are sent against us definitely can still have impact. If they're not meaning to curse, it's like they're projecting energy at you. You can dissipate that. You can boundary it out. There's things that you can do if people are even actively cursing you through one of the cursing traditions. But it's a lot more difficult when it's actively tended. If someone sends it and walks away from it, you can take it down, no problem. But if someone's actually tending it, they just put it back up.
Fascinating. Is there anything that you can do to help send that energy away, clear it from yourself? If you just start to feel like something is off, maybe the answer is coming to you for a session. What are your thoughts on that?
Some things need to come to me for a session, but there's a lot of things that you can actually do on your own. I tell people that having a good energy hygiene practice is really, really important. So something where you're clearing off any energy that you might have picked up and refilling yourself with positive energy. And you can use whatever practice that you have. Reiki's a great one. Any type of meditation is really good. Any type of grounding work is really good. You can do it as simply as setting an intention that every time you wash your hands or take a shower, that you wash off anything that isn't yours. That will help you a lot. But you need to remember, or we need to remember, that it's not just removing, you have to fill back in. So if you don't fill back in, then you have holes in your energy field or body, and that's where things kind of get in and get stuck. So I find the things that are just, in life you pick up that are collective or just people trash talking, you can kind of wash those off with hygiene. Where you tend to need help is when people are really deliberately targeting and intentional. Sometimes we can undo them, ask your guides if they can undo it. Sometimes they can, which is great. And when they can't, then you would need someone like me to help.
And then on that note too, because it sounds like some curses carry spirits with them and some do not. So let's talk about the ones that carry spirits with them. What does that look like? How does the spirit get involved?
Yeah. So like when someone is setting up a curse, it's how do they power it? And so when spirits get involved, it happens, it can happen accidentally. They can volunteer. So I found this when I first started learning, I was doing more simpler or straightforward curses. I find some elementals like fire and air, both in particular, they like the chaos or the movement energy of a curse. So if they like you and they think it would be fun, they might join in. The ones, and they definitely can add power to a curse, so I don't want to discount that. But the ones that are causing more damage are the ones that are bound into a curse. And that can happen by a being agreeing to do it. They get something out of it when they agree. So it might be someone with a relationship with a chaos related being that says, hey, if you go in this curse, they'll either give them something to get them to agree, or they'll set up the curse in such a way that it causes more chaos or pain or the energy that the being needs or wants. And so they'll set up the curse in a way that feeds the being through the curse. Sometimes, if you go back in time, I don't do this in this lifetime, but in a past life, I probably would have, where you would come to me and say, hey, could you remove this curse? And I would remove it. And I would take the being that's fueling your curse and I would keep it. The next person would come in and say, can you set this curse? I was like, yeah, I got the perfect being for that. I just removed it from the client in front of you. And so I'd pull it off of yours and put it in the next one, and off it goes. That's great energy management for me. That's horrible for the being who, once it's stuck in this cycle, just keeps going from curse to curse, spell to spell. And so in this lifetime, I've made a promise to the spirit realm that I will not force anyone to do anything. Whenever I find a being in a curse or with a client, I make sure it gets completely freed and goes all the way home. And that's my promise to the spirit realm. It feels really important to me in this lifetime, but it also makes it safe for any spirit to talk to me. They don't have to worry I'm going to trap them or force them to do something else. Things are less likely to hide from me. I'm also finding, which I kind of knew would happen, but I didn't realize to what extent, that I'm really building relationships with all these different types of beings. So now when something shows up in front of me, even a traditional Mesopotamian type demon, if I can ask for help from the demon realm and one will come and help me, which would never have happened in the beginning. It was very adversarial. And now they're like, yeah, she won't cause any problems. She'll actually will help. The first time a spirit told me, we've been watching you, it totally creeped me out. Go talk to my guides later. And they're like, you're just building your reputation as someone who will not cause further harm, at least not on purpose.
I love that. And I love that your position is to do no harm, because I think that there are a lot of energy healers out there who may just want to like rip these things away, and destroy them or get rid of them. And also too, that can have unintended consequences, it sounds like, from what you're sharing.
It would definitely have consequences. And it's just not kind. So like working with the spirit realm and compassion is really just those are probably the two things that are most important to me in our practice is consent and compassion. Because I find a lot of times the beings that are causing the most harm, they're not out here to harm us. They're tied into a binding. And so they're like, if I wasn't bound, would I do this? No. So it's like, well, if I undo the binding and help you leave, do you want to? And they're like, will you? I'm like, yeah. So I think what a lot of people who maybe don't practice in the same way is they see the client, the human client, as the most important. And it's not that they're not important. They are very important. But if you're the most important and I see something with you, if I just rip it out and send it on and set it aside, I helped you and you're the client. Whereas I see everything that's attached to you as the client as well. The being is just as much the client as you are in my type of work.
Fascinating. That is such a helpful perspective and such an interesting and important way to look at it because we all matter, right? Even beings in the spirit world also matter too. And I have to say too, just to give a personal example. So I worked with Gayle for something that I needed help with. And Gayle helped me by closing a big portal in my apartment. And there was an unintended consequence from that, which was that there was a being who was using that portal to cross between my apartment and their realm. And when that portal was closed, the being was mad at me for closing the portal. So I had a little bit of an incident in my house where the being got a little bit angry with me and may have pushed me down the stairs.
That's horrible.
However, I really learned an important lesson in that, which was exactly like what we're talking about, that these spirits do matter and their needs matter as well. And that we can, just being more aware of that has helped me have more discernment as a practitioner.
Yeah. So for me as a practitioner, I'm looking for that. I don't want someone to get pushed down the stairs. But if they're not in this realm, if they're not tied to the portal, I'm not likely to see them. So it is important to be aware that everything's connected in ways that we may or may not be able to see.
Oh, 100% for sure. And so when it comes to different kinds of spirit attachments, from what I know, so I'm just going to list a few that I'm aware of. We can have human spirits, ancestors, spirits of this realm who may be lost or haven't been able to find their way home. So they're looking for something similar. And also we have elemental spirits, we have star beings, we have what it sounds like are demonic spirits. So those are the lower level entities. Does that sound like a pretty inclusive list? Is there anything I'm missing? Anything else that you feel called to share?
You're missing a ton.
I love it. Good.
So, I mean, we can go on. There's thousands and thousands of beings. I want to talk about demons really fast because a long time ago, the Catholic Church basically deemed anything that wasn't human a demon. And that really isn't true. So I think that if you're talking about an actual demon comes from the Egyptian Mesopotamian tradition. They report to the gods. They usually work in packs. They have a real specific task. The only one that can remove that task from the demon is the god that they made the agreement with. So demons are a really, really specific thing, and there actually aren't that many of them around. So a lot of people are talking about demons. They really just mean, something not human. The other thing that really gets called a demon a lot, and if you ask them what they are, they'll tell you they're a demon, which I think is kind of fun, are the fallen angels. So the fallen angels do all sorts of shadow work. And those actually, they will call themselves demons as well. But most spirits are, when people look at them and they look darker or heavier or more dense, or they're causing harm, they're just out of place. So you think of them as being sick or being upset, like their emotions are all over the place. So, and that's what most people who are talking about demons are actually talking about, a spirit that is out of place. But there are thousands and thousands of different types of beings. some of the ones that I would add is I think some of the mythological creatures show up as beings. There are a whole bunch of things within the magical traditions that show up as beings. You see a lot of the big category would be like the little people. So gnomes, elves, fairies, hobgoblins, brownies. I have a book that's 3 inches thick. They're just different types of fairy type beings, which is really fun. So there's lots and lots and lots of beings.
Yes. Wow. Love learning. Love hearing all of this. It's so fascinating. And so with that being said, when someone comes to you for a session, they're likely feeling that something in their life is blocked or they're trying to get somewhere, they're not able to make it happen. Maybe they're feeling and sensing different physical things that are going on in their life. When you're going forward into the spirit space to do this type of energy healing work, are you working with spirit guides of your own? What does that work look like for you?
Yes, I work with a team of guides, and people can show up, like you said, for, just because they're feeling off or out of place. Also, it's really common for other practitioners or psychics to tell someone that they have a being or a possession or a curse and then not actually clear it. And so people who are like, well, now what do I do with this? Will Google and find me as well. So when people show up in my world, I work with a whole team of guides. So as I learn different modalities, I like to ask for a specialist to do that type of work with me. I started training that way a long time ago, and I've just continued it. So everything that is new for me. So then when a client shows up to talk to me, I usually ask for one guide to be kind of a point between me and the team. I channel a lot during session. So I don't want the entire team talking to me individually while I'm talking to the client, because it's kind of distracting and overwhelming for me. So usually it's the goddess Freya that will talk to me, but she's giving voice to the entire team behind me. But I also know, based on who shows up when the client and I start talking, what the work is, because the guides specialize. So if I know, depending on the guides that show up, what the work is before we ever start talking.
Wow. Well, and when it comes to healing after a session, maybe some of the integration and the aftercare that comes from working with you, what do you recommend for people to maybe recover, or what are some of the things that can happen after a session? What does that look like?
Yeah. Most people feel lighter after a session, like energetically, physically, emotionally lighter. But the work takes a little while to like fully settle or integrate through the body. I find most people are really feeling the work pretty much instantly. Like by that evening, the next day, they're starting to feel the shifts, but it doesn't like ground out and become like part of who we are, as who we are right now. For it takes a week or two for that to happen. So what I'm telling clients to do is that they need to they need to practice grounding. They need to refill their own energy bodies. If the work involves returning something that was lost, then they need to interact with that soul piece or that gift and help it integrate. But it really is a lot of grounding and tending and paying attention to our inner dialogue. Sometimes we're needing to shift our mindsets. If you think you can never do something because you've been constantly blocked, when you think about doing it, the knee-jerk reaction is I can't. So it's like we're paying attention to the things we're continuing to say to ourselves and reevaluating or shifting the mindset. It helps integrate or expand the work.
And what would you say some of the most common things are that people come to you for, that you handle a lot?
Almost everybody has some ancestors that have not fully crossed into spirit. I almost want to say everybody does. It's so common. I'm sure there's exceptions to that. I'm actually not even thinking of any right now. So it really is close to everybody. But it can be anywhere from a couple for people who really do tend their ancestral lines up to I haven't met anyone quite as bad as I was when I started, but I had over 2,000 hanging out with me when I first started. And I was like, no wonder I never feel good. I'm always tired. I'm hearing voices. So somewhere in the 20 to 30, 40 is pretty normal because they move up and down the line. So that's probably, I do that with almost every client. The other thing that is really common is some type of ancestral intention that has become binding. So I think most of us have that. And I think those of us that have kids or even just really involved parents, it's really common for the older generations to make intentions for the younger. And people inadvertently add power to them. So those are also really common. Non-human spirits I see regularly, but they're not as common. I find things come in cycles. When I first really started playing with and learning about demons, it felt like every single client had a demon. And I was like, are they really this common? But that went away after a couple of weeks. So I find those of us that if you feel like you've been magical or spiritual for many, many lifetimes, which is probably a lot of your listener base, it's more common for us to have beings from past lives that are attached to us that are not human. Sometimes a lot of the mythological type beings or the magical beings get attached, sometimes with consent, sometimes not, to give us more power or protection, because it was more common if we were active in those arenas in past lives. I think when we make agreements with beings like that, we just assume that they go away at the end of our lifetime, or that we'll just always have the same knowledge base then that we have now. And that's really not true. So sometimes they're really politely tapping you on your shoulder, trying to get your attention so you can change the agreement, let them go. Other times they're really angry and you're like, I don't understand why the energy around me is so chaotic and angry. I would be looking at a being if that's happening.
Yeah. One question that comes forward for me is with the ancestral piece. How do you feel about calling in your ancestors to support you on your journey? Or do you feel that the ancestors can do more harm than good?
It depends on how you call them. So I think working with your ancestors is a powerful tool. And I think it's great for most of us. Some of us not, but most of us, yes. But if you're going to want to work with your ancestors, you want to work with your healthy crossed over ancestors. And it pays major dividends to specify that. If you don't specify that, then the ancestor that's not crossed over, that's trying to help, is following you around telling you what to do. But they have a very limited perspective. It's not the same as a crossed over ancestor. I was talking to a client, like I've been doing this for a while, where I was like, the crossed over ancestor is that boss that helps you get fully trained and is always there if you need them, but they kind of leave you alone. They're like, I'm over here doing my thing. If you need me, come get me. And when you do, they're really there. Not the absent one, but versus the micromanaging boss that follows you around telling you what to do all of the time. And they don't really care why you chose to do it differently. They just want you to do it their way. To me, that's kind of the uncrossed over ancestor. They're giving advice from their point of view, which is valuable. I don't want to discount that, but they don't allow you to have your own opinion as well as those that are crossed over. The other thing I want to say about ancestors is if you have an ancestral altar in your house, you want the stuff on your altar to not be pictures. So it could be an item or something that reminds you of them. But when you put pictures, especially of the recently departed, you can give them an anchor to stay in your house versus crossover.
Oh my goodness. Thankfully, that's not me, but someone needed to hear that.
It's more common than you would think. Yeah. So.
And so spirits who have not crossed over, so what we're talking about is they attach to your energy body, right? And they're siphoning energy from you in order to be able to continue their existence. So that would lead us to be extremely tired, right?
Extremely tired. And also if they had like a physical accident before they passed. Like I had one client whose brother had died in a motorcycle accident. And when he died, he also broke his arm in a couple of places. After he passed, he was kind of scared. He wasn't sure what to do. He didn't like when we pass, our spirit guides show up to help us cross back into the spirit plane. And I'd say that happens the vast majority of the time. But he was scared. He was confused. He wasn't sure what to do. So he went and stayed with his sister, which on one hand, that's lovely, right? We weren't ready to lose our loved ones either. So, but the problem is he still had in his head the pain from hurting his arm. So he stayed with his sister. His sister's like, I'm really tired. I'm really sad. I can't get over it. My arm really hurts. I've been to the doctor. They can't find anything wrong with my arm. I saw a Reiki person. She sent me to you. And we're like, oh, did your brother break his arm? And she's like, oh, I didn't. Yes. She hadn't told me that before. So by helping him reconnect to a healthy ancestor, open doorways for him and help him leave, it lightened her grief. It gave her more energy and her arm quit hurting.
And it sounds like some of those strange symptoms that you might have, like strange physical symptoms that are out of left field, out of the blue, or also some of those mental symptoms, like maybe feeling like you're having a lot of different thoughts, or maybe there's an inclination to do something that you normally wouldn't do. That could be because there's something who's trying to influence you or who's trying to help you or guide you, right?
Exactly. So, if they think that the best possible life for you would be to get married and move to the country and raise horses, then you're like, well, I want to move to the country and raise horses. And you're like, but I'm a city girl. And why do I want to do that? This is like that back and forth in your brain, what they think is best, what you think is best. And, if they stay because they're scared, which is another big reason why spirits stay, they may not be trying to help. So they're just trying to continue living their life without a body. And the problem with that is if they're staying with you, yeah, they're borrowing your energy. But anything they want to do, the only way they're going to get to do it without a body is to get you to do it.
Living vicariously through takes on a whole new meaning, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, if we're fully mindfully in control, they're here, but we're in control. The problem is it's hard to stay that way 24/7, impossible to stay that way 24/7. So if you find, I act or do things differently when I am tired, medicated, or had any type of substance, if that changes your personality or your desires, I would say you definitely have a spirit attachment because we've kind of stepped back a little bit and they can step forward. And that's how they get to live vicariously through us.
Wow. When it comes to discernment with your spiritual gifts, so my listener is very intuitive and she may be working on connecting with her own guides. So when it comes to communicating with your spirit team and honing your discernment, do you have any tips on making sure you're connecting with beings who are not attached to you versus the ones that possibly could be attached?
Yeah. Setting sacred space is really, really important. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. And then I think in doing regular hygiene. So I tell people do hygiene before you try and connect with your guides, set sacred space before you try and connect with your guides. And then it's just kind of playing with it, getting to know them, what they feel like, what they look like, what they sound like. When you're like, that doesn't sound like Freya, it's probably not. So the other thing about guides, especially if you connect with really common anything, but I was going to say common religious figures, is a lot of times there's some projections. So like if you say Mother Mary, each maybe different religious type has a different version of Mother Mary. Different congregations or cultures might revere her differently. And so what happens is they kind of create thought forms of Mother Mary, versions of Mother Mary. And so it's really easy to connect to the thought form or the version and not the true actually aspect of a guide. So if you're like this, I'm not sure, this doesn't feel right. Setting sacred space and then just saying you want to talk to the divine aspect or the true source version might get you a different version of a guide. That being said, even true source divine aspects can feel differently. Like I mentioned, Freya is often a point for me. If I talk to the Freya that I learned in class, where I actually talk to the version of Freya that is in the Norse version that you would interact with her in, say, Sweden or Denmark, I get a totally different energy. The one here is way more laid back. The one there is really fierce.
I could not agree more. That's so interesting because I work with her as well. And I totally see the two different energies. It's so interesting. And I think the verbiage that you shared is so helpful with making those connections. I love that.
The other thing you might try is you want to talk to the compassionate aspect, or the warrior aspect, like what aspect of the god. Like a lot of gods and goddesses have duality, war and love, right? So which version do you want to talk to? Kali's the one that comes to mind. I love working with Kali. But with Kali, I'm usually really careful that I want to talk to the compassionate aspect. Kali can be really direct and harsh, which could be good, but I want to know that that's what I'm getting. If I'm feeling vulnerable and asking for help, that's not usually helpful for me.
Yeah, 100%. And I think too, that brings up an important point, which is when you're in a moment of distress and needing help and desiring a spiritual connection, to just be really clear. I know it's hard when we're having an emotional moment and we're like, spirit guides, help me. But to, do your best, first of all, to hone your connection with your spirit team so that in those moments, they are actually helping you versus just putting that intention out there into space, because there could be beings that come forward who may not be the most helpful.
True.
Love it. Yeah. And okay, I'm just pausing here because I feel like there was another question that I was going to ask you, and I cannot think of what it was. For some reason, I feel guided, Gayle, to ask you, are there any wild, interesting, or crazy stories or recent things that you feel called to share that you've come into in your practice that have just been really interesting for you with your work?
Funny. The one that's coming to mind is something I would have expected. I'm just going to trust that somebody needs to hear this. Is some of us have real connections to the land, and I didn't expect that some people really have to clear or work with pieces of land, which may not feel logical. And maybe it's a past life connection. The one that's coming to mind is someone who made a past life vow to tend the land. And so in this lifetime, she's incarnated someplace completely different. And she feels very, very called to tend the land. And it was someplace she didn't want to move. She kept feeling or being told that she had to move to this particular place over and over and over again. And she really didn't want to. So she's showing up to me going, why is everybody pushing me to move to this place and land? And everybody meaning in spirit. So her biological family and friends are like, don't move. And what we ended up finding was that, she was required to tend the land and that it was a vow that she had made. So it wasn't something that she could easily shift on her own. I find that some things we can change on our own, contracts, vows, agreements, and other things we really can't without being in violation of the agreement or the vow. And when that happens, you really do need a third party to help you do that. So for me, it was going back to that moment in time where the vow was made and just asking more questions. We're not very precise with our language as a species. We have all sorts of assumptions about, things only last, for this lifetime or, so going back and saying, what did you actually intend? Was the vow for this lifetime or while you lived on the land? Or did you mean for it to cross every lifetime for the rest of eternity? Most of the time we don't mean that. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we don't mean that. And so if I go back to the moment where it was made and I'm talking to everybody who's part of that original vow and just kind of clarifying what everybody means, for me, it's like, okay, well, can we say this instead of that? And just making it slightly more specific. And they're like, yeah, that's what we mean. And it changes to that. And then suddenly you no longer have the requirement in the modern day. So But the one about tending the land, I see that as a theme. There are some of us here that have really strong attachments to specific parts of the world or the land that we really have to help fix. Using me as an example, I feel really strongly that when I find land spirits that are not on their native land, there's a grief and a pain that goes with that is really unbearable for me. I will stop and help that spirit no matter where I am in my life. I don't have to be in session. A lot of my personal boundaries are like, if you need help for me, it has to be in session to the spirit world.
Yeah.
And, it's like if you're a human spirit that needs help crossing, show up when I'm working, and you can go when I work with that for the client. I'm opening all sorts of doors. Don't knock on my bedroom door at 3 a.m. I will not like you. I will not help you. But land spirits, I feel really drawn to personally, but I'm finding there's quite a few of us that have real ties or requirements with the land.
Oh, yes. People in my audience, 100% definitely needed to hear that myself too. That was really helpful to know. And I think one of the really important pieces that you shared in this conversation today that's so helpful to hear is this concept of asking questions, asking your spirit guides the right questions, really getting clear on, well, who is helping me? Why are they here? And also asking those clear questions around, well, why was this agreement made? Or what happened in the past life that led to this agreement? Really just, again, and I'm all about that too, as an Akashic Records practitioner. How can we make sure that we're asking the right questions in order to get the information that we're seeking?
For sure. One of my favorite questions when I'm just like, I'm floundering, I'm not getting the answers that I feel like I'm needing or looking for, is to ask what I don't know enough to ask. Or asking, someone asked this on my behalf, and it was another practitioner who knows me really well, so someone I would consider a friend. We were talking to one of the ladies at the lake, and she's channeling this question because afterwards she looks kind of like, oh God, I'm sorry I asked that. But she asked the goddess what Gayle was ignoring. And I was like, oh, I just got called out hard because the goddess is laughing, and she asked her how much time we had was the answer. So sometimes when you're like, this doesn't feel right, I don't feel like I'm getting the answer I am needing, looking for what you don't know enough to ask or what you're ignoring. If you ask that for yourself, you're not getting called out as bad as if somebody else asks it for you. But those are really powerful questions.
I feel like that's such a beautiful way to kind of wrap up our conversation and beautiful guidance for everyone today for listening to this episode. Gayle, do you have any advice for us on living a more mystical life? So first of all, what does being a mystic mean to you?
Yeah. Being a mystic to me means tapping into the spiritual or energetic gifts to live a more grounded, aligned, present life. So it's including the spiritual and energetic gifts in the 3D world is what being a mystic means to me. Oftentimes, like when I think of the big mystics of the world, I'm thinking of seers and prophets, but it doesn't have to be that big. It's really just using any spiritual gift in the modern world.
Mm-hmm. And any final tips for us for living a more mystical life?
Learn your guides. Talk to your guides. They can help you so much, and they're your connection into the spirit realm. And really build a relationship. Don't go off and meet as many guides as you can. Make a new best friend in the spirit realm, because anything you need in the spirit realm, they can help you get. If you go to that one guide and say, hey, I'm looking for this, they can introduce you to a new guide or take you to a new place. But you want them to know that that person is your friend, that they have your back, that you would trust them to take you anywhere in the spirit realm. And you can't do that with a stranger. You need to make friends with spirits.
My own guides are bothering me to ask you a question that I'm like pushing it away, but for some reason I need to ask it. You said something earlier on in the conversation about altar space and not placing the photos of recently deceased ancestors on the altar. Is there anything else around altars or items in your home that are not helpful for you to have around? Does that make sense?
Mhm. Uh, the guides are saying all things are possible to have in your home, but some things need to be cleaned more regularly than others.
Yeah.
So it's really important when you have things that maybe feel heavy or dark or have a whole lot of emotional residue on them, that you're energetically clearing them off. And you can do that in lots of different ways. I like to use sound. Some people like to use sage. You can set them in the sun or the moon or water, but things that have a lot of emotional residue can attract energy. And that's not often or usually helpful. The extra energy. It's okay to have the emotional item, but you don't want it to be harboring other things.
Helpful. Yeah, I think that's really important, especially as we head into this new year. Spring cleaning can be a good time to, clear out the home and clearing your crystals as well, because we all know that they also pull in energy too.
Yeah. My guides are wanting to say like attracts like. And so if you have something in your house that has a negative connotation, it's attracting more of that negative energy, that negative connotation. So, and it's not that you can't keep it, but you have to clear it.
Mm-hmm. And for the audience to find you, where do you recommend that people go? How can people schedule a session with you? And do you have anything coming up in your business that you would like to share?
Definitely. So my website is energyhealingwithspirits.com. And I would love if people connected with me through my website. There's more of my personal story on there, along with what kind of work and sessions that I do. I love doing one-on-one sessions with clients. It's my bread and butter. I love doing it. Everybody has a different and unique story. But the thing that I'm feeling called to share is there's a workshops page on my website. And the workshop series for me starts with talking to your guides, learning how to talk to your guides in your own way, how to set sacred space, do basic hygiene, know who you're talking to. And I think everyone can talk to their guides. So I really want people to learn how to do it in a way that works for them. And it's coming up in February. That skill, not necessarily my class, you can have the skill from lots of different places, but that skill is a prerequisite for everything else that I teach. So if you don't know how to talk to your guides or you want to learn other ways of doing it, I would love to see you in that February workshop. The basics for me are talking to your guides, boundaries, hygiene. And those are the first 3 classes coming up in the new year, February, March, April. But I teach a new class. They're only 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours once a month on Saturdays. And once you know how to talk to your guides, you're welcome to hop in and out of any class that interests you. Mediumship, space clearing, body mapping, pendulums, talking to a guide about whether or not we're fully human is one of my favorites. Talking to the spirit of the year. So come play. The workshops, aside from the couple of foundational ones, are fun. They're interactive. We have a nice community that comes in and out of them, and I would love to welcome them in.
Awesome. And just to clarify, you do not need to take your spirit guide class in order to do your other classes. You just need to have the relationship with your guides in order
You
to
need
do
to
the
have
classes.
Fast way of talking to your guides. If you're like, I talk to them in my dreams, that's not fast enough. So, because the way that my class center are set up is we're going to do at least 2 interactions with the guides on the subject matter. So you have to be able to talk to your guides in real time. And you can learn that from anyone, not me. You can learn it from me in February, but you can have that skill from any other place.
I love that. Wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gayle, for coming on the show. Appreciate you and your time and energy. And yes, this has been another mystical episode. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.